In this video, I'm going to be reacting to 9 things you don't do in the Netherlands from an American perspective. And if you don't know, I am from the Netherlands, so I'll be giving my take on these 9 points. So let's just go ahead and get into it.
Hi everyone, I'm Ava, and today I wanted to talk to you about 9 things that you should absolutely not do when you are here in the Netherlands. So I wanted to make this video because, of course, when I would first visit the Netherlands as an American tourist, before I graduated to the level of an American expat, I definitely made a few little faux pas here and there. And I wanted to add a few other mistakes to this list that maybe I haven't made personally, but I think I've seen other tourists or other expats make these mistakes. I wanted to help those of you out who are less familiar with Dutch culture than I am, and I'm not that familiar with Dutch culture. But for those of you who know way more about the Netherlands and the Dutch than I do, why don't you comment below on the things that I've mentioned in this video or anything that I've left out to help those who might need it.
That's what I'll be doing in this video.
So, without further ado, the first thing that I wanted to talk about today is when you come to the Netherlands, either as a tourist or an expat, do not refer to the Netherlands as Holland. The Netherlands has 12 provinces, and only 2 of those 12 provinces are the provinces of Holland, that is Noord and Zuid-Holland. Now, as an English speaker, I definitely learned that you could either call the Netherlands Holland or the Netherlands, and it didn't matter. So I found out, painfully, that it's not quite accurate to do so. And again, it's only 2 out of the 12 provinces. I was kind of surprised because if those 2 terms are interchangeable, you would expect that most of the Netherlands was called Holland, but that is not the case. So for that reason, I would suggest that when you are here in the Netherlands, just stick to calling it the Netherlands. You might actually end up offending some people who are not from the provinces of Holland because they do not want to be left out when you're talking about their country. Understandably so. And there are also Dutch people who, well, let's just say they will know what you mean and they won't get upset if you refer to the Netherlands as Holland, because I've heard Dutch people do the same when they speak English.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I don't really care, to be honest, what you call it, because I know what you mean, like she said. But I do know there are some people who might get offended by it. But at the end of the day, it's not the official name for our country, the Netherlands. But I just think it's a little bit silly to get, like, people get so offended sometimes. And I don't really understand why, because you know what you're talking about, or you know what they're talking about. And they just might not be aware that it's not actually called Holland. So
No, they won't get mad at you. Dutch people are generally very nice, but if you want to seem a little bit more local or in tune with the country, then I would stick to calling the Netherlands the Netherlands. While your other option is referring to the country by its full name, which is the Kingdom of the Netherlands. But I would recommend against it just because it sounds really odd when you say things like, I love being on holiday in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. You see how that's a little bit antiquated? The second thing I want to talk about is extremely, extremely important. So I want all of you watching this to pay close attention to it. When you are in the Netherlands, and if you are not on a bike, if you are on foot, do not stand or walk on the bike lane. Please do not do that. Well, you could, and then you will very quickly get hit by a bicycle. Remember how I told you that Dutch people are generally very nice? Well, the one way to piss off a Dutch person is by standing or walking in the bike lane. So I find this really funny because this is something I 100% did when I visited the Netherlands as a tourist. In fact, if I had a friend with me, we would play this game of who was gonna get hit by a bike first, or who made that mistake more often than the other, because we couldn't help ourselves. I kind of see why that is, because if you actually compare the bicycle lane to the sidewalks here in the Netherlands, there is a big difference sometimes. The sidewalks here are extremely, extremely cute. They are made of these cobblestones or these little bricks, and they're small and narrow, adorable, but also not the best to walk on if you're not used to them.
I mean, it doesn't look like that everywhere in the country. A lot of the times it just looks like regular stones, but um, I feel like sometimes it is kind of accepted to walk on the bicycle lane, especially like if it's not a bigger city. And sometimes there's just no real sidewalk there because, like, for example, at Halve Zolenpad, there's like a really long bicycle path. I don't know exactly from what city to what city it is. I kind of forgot, but people like to take walks on that, um, yeah, bicycle path, and I feel like that's accepted. So sometimes it's fine, but it's more so I feel like when you're in bigger cities and there is a clear sidewalk there, then it's like people might be like, okay, why are you walking on this bicycle path when there's a sidewalk right there and you can just as easily walk there?
In contrast, these bike lanes are extremely smooth. The Dutch, and now me included, pay quite some high taxes to keep our bike lanes pothole free. This is not America. No potholes here. The bike lanes are comfortable, they are pretty spacious and easy to use when you are on a bike. Also extremely desirable if you want to walk. So I get that you want to be walking on that bike lane, but just don't do it. Oftentimes the bike lanes are also quite close to the sidewalk. So again, I see where you're coming from with this. I've made this mistake before, but don't do it. It is extremely important that you keep those two separate. It's really for your own good because, like I said, you will get hit by a bike, or worse, a scooter or an electric bike, something that's actually going pretty fast. The next thing I want to talk about is one of my favorite things about the Netherlands, and that is that they are so lax about drinking in public. I love having a good drink in the park. Sometimes I love going to a bar and taking my drink outside just because I can. In America, you will get arrested. I love to exercise my freedom of not being arrested while drinking in public. However, something you should not do is when you are drinking in public, be very loud and obnoxious at the same time. I have not done this personally. Yes, I've drunk in public, but while you're drinking, do not be loud and obnoxious. Maybe I was loud and obnoxious, because I'm American, and as a virtue of being American, I am extremely loud and obnoxious, but I wasn't, being very chaotic on the street. Oftentimes, especially in Amsterdam, I've seen tourists, I'm assuming they're tourists, there's some telltale signs, but oftentimes I've seen tourists, especially in Amsterdam, walking around and being very loud and actually being extremely disruptive to the people who live there. When I lived in Amsterdam and I would commute from work back to my house, in that short distance, I might have encountered like 20 bachelorette and bachelorette parties on a given evening. I honestly didn't even know you could have that many bachelor or bachelorette parties at one time, in one time and space. I mean, haven't these people heard of the divorce rates? But okay, jokes aside, I have firsthand experience how hard it can be when tourists are, I understand they're having a good time, they're having a party, but it is so disruptive if you just live there and you're just trying to get home from work. So if you are visiting the Netherlands and you are a tourist and you have a good reason to celebrate, just keep in mind that there are people who live there and they're just trying to, cross the street without running into one of you. I love how now.
Yeah, that might be more of a thing in bigger cities as well, like Amsterdam, because I haven't really experienced a whole lot of that going on where I lived. But that's definitely, I can see how that's very annoying if you're living there, if you are living in Amsterdam, and you're just trying to sleep and there's people just screaming. So I feel like that's a pretty good tip.
Now I can talk about tourists very separately from my life, which is the life of an expat. But I also feel like this is important because many expats I've talked to, and myself included, feel like some of the tourists are out there giving us a bad name. No, we are very different from tourists. And also, if you're a tourist, there's nothing wrong with that. I was once one of you too. Did you notice how I talked about the problem of tourists being very loud and obnoxious in public? as something that applies to all of the Netherlands when it's really a problem that mostly applies in Amsterdam, even if it might happen in the rest of the country on occasion. Yeah, so don't do that. Do not talk about Amsterdam as being representative of the rest of the country. Because Amsterdam is so popular, I find that sometimes, and I did this too, people refer to things that apply to Amsterdam and assume that it applies to the rest of the country. So they talk about things that happen in Amsterdam and assume that people across the Netherlands feel the same way or experiencing the same things. The city life, especially in Amsterdam, can be very different. And I know I did this myself too, where I wasn't explicitly talking about Amsterdam in reference to the whole country, but it was implied in what I was saying. So when you are here, and especially if you are living in Amsterdam, one thing to keep in mind is it's not necessarily the case that what people are experiencing in Amsterdam holds true for the rest of the country. So if you want to not offend any locals, I would recommend you don't do that. Of course, unless you're speaking to someone who lives in Amsterdam, then they probably think the same as you do.
Yeah, that will definitely get a lot of people riled up. And it's definitely a thing when you, as a Dutch person, go on vacation to other countries and then, you get talking to other people and they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" And you say, "Oh, I'm from the Netherlands." Or I would say Holland because most people know about Holland. So I would say, "I'm from Holland." And then they're like, "Oh, Amsterdam. You live in Amsterdam." And I would just be like, "Yeah, I live in Amsterdam." But I don't. And then, or they would be like, if I wouldn't say that, then they'd be like, "Oh, um, yeah, where are you from in the Netherlands? What part?" Or they would just, yeah, say where you're from. And then I'd be like, "Well, you probably don't know what where I'm from. Like you've never heard of that." Which most cases, yeah, they didn't. So I just say, "Oh, I'm from the south of the Netherlands." And they'd be like, and then you could just tell that they had no idea. But that's just funny.
Number 5 on this list is do not take pictures of the sex workers in the red light district. Now,
I don't know. Was that a fly? I don't know if you saw that.
I've not done this myself, but I have seen others doing this, and don't do it because it is disrespectful, and second, it is so annoying. These people are just trying to do their jobs. Imagine if you were at your place of work and people were taking pictures of you all the time. So I think that it's not always out of bad intention that people maybe want to take pictures. It could be out of broad interest. Maybe people find this really fascinating that here in the Netherlands, everything is really open, that you can actually go to the red light district and it's not a taboo. But so I think some people maybe want to take pictures out of interest. They want to document their trip or visit in the Netherlands. So even if you are someone taking pictures out of broad interest, don't do it because it is just not respectful. It's not viewed in a positive light by any means. So put your cameras away and take pictures of the lovely canals instead.
Yeah, I could also understand that if you've never seen it before, you might want to capture it and show your friends or family back home. But yeah, I agree, you shouldn't just take pictures of people who, yeah, are doing their sex work.
Number 6 is don't refer to a coffee shop as a place you're going to get coffee. Or do, and see where that takes you. For those of you who may not be aware, coffee shops here in the Netherlands refer to something else other than a cafe. You go to a coffee shop not to get coffee, but to get some of the good stuff. You know what I'm saying? And a cafe is where you get the other good stuff. The coffee. So I would recommend you keep those two separate. And it's kind of hard as a speaker of English, and I really did this even after I found out the difference between those two places. I would still refer to a place where I wanted to get coffee as a coffee shop because in English, that just refers to a place that specializes in coffee. I'm sure there's something to be said about why the places where you can go get weed are referred to as coffee shops, but I'm no expert on that.
Me neither. So if you know, because I never thought about that, why they're called that. But now that she mentions it, I'm also wondering that. So if you know, then let us know in the comments.
So all I'm gonna say is you're better off keeping those two things separate. Otherwise, you will have some extremely confusing conversations. I know that whenever I have friends visiting, I have to ask them multiple times to make sure I know where they want to go. Because sometimes people do want to go to a coffee shop for the stuff that's not coffee, and other times they're really just trying to say cafe. Number 7 is don't ask people how they're doing unless you actually mean it. So as an American, and I've said this before a couple of times, when we say hello, sometimes we'll instead say, how you doing? And that means the same thing as hello. We're not.
That was such a culture shock to me when I went to the US. When the first time some a worker in a store was asking, "Oh, how are you doing?" I genuinely thought that he was just asking how you doing, and I didn't know that it was like a form of saying hello. So I went like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing good. How are you?" And then I guess, yeah, you're not really supposed to say anything back about how you're doing. Um, yeah, it's just it's still kind of a foreign concept to me. I still haven't quite, or in the time that I was in the US for 3 months, didn't really get used to it. But that's such a big difference. Yeah, just there were also some other words that they, or other things that they would say instead of hello, but I can't remember right now. But it's just different.
Really looking for a response, but this is a problem that doesn't just apply to Americans. It also applies to speakers of British English. I've discovered that the phrase, you alright, when spoken by a British person also just means hello. So I myself find the British you alright pretty confusing. So I can see how the American version is also confusing to people. But here in the Netherlands, neither of those things mean hello, and when you ask people if they're alright or how they're doing, they will give you a response. And it can be a little startling for a Dutch person who speaks perfect English, basically, to get these questions asked and then have the person not wait for an answer. So if you're asking someone how they're doing, don't just walk away. Instead, I suggest you wait, catch their response, and say something in return.
That would be quite funny indeed if, yeah, someone, when you're in the Netherlands and someone comes up to you and they'd be like, "Oh, how are you?" And then just keep walking. That would be really strange in the Netherlands.
Number 8 is a mistake I still make to this day. It's something I am having a lot of trouble getting used to, even after a year or something of living here in the Netherlands. And that is, I would suggest you do not ask Dutch people to hang out spontaneously unless you're ready to receive a rejection. Why is that? It's because Dutch people have very full, busy social calendars. In the US, if I wanted to hang out with a person on a Saturday night, it would really not be weird for me to send them a message earlier that day on Saturday asking them if they wanted to do something later. Here in the Netherlands, you would be really lucky if you found someone who was free. It's because Dutch people really have their time planned out, their social calendars and schedules full, so if you want to hang out with them, you need to plan weeks, if not months in advance for a weekend date, and a week or two in advance if you want to see them during the week. Yes, I've also found this to be somewhat of a difficulty. Not a difficulty, but I've definitely found that people don't tend to be free even a day or two before you ask them to hang out, even if it's during the week. So if you're from a culture like I am, I'm from the US, where it is really normal to hang out spontaneously, that might be something you have to get used to when you move here.
Yeah, I talked about this in a video last week, I think. So I won't go too deep into it again, but that is true. And some people might even have no space in their calendar for 3 or 4 months, which is crazy to me. But we definitely like to plan ahead, but it's of course not every person will do that. and me myself. And I definitely am not planning that far ahead. Maybe a week, at most 2 weeks.
And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is that beautiful moment when you finally get invited by some Dutch friends to hang out. I have a big tip for you when it comes to those occasions, and that is when you get invited over by a Dutch person, do not be late. Let me explain. In the US, when you have a birthday party or a social gathering of some kind, and let's say you specify a time, like 6 p.m., I will see you at 6 p.m. People could show up anywhere between 6:15 p.m. to 8 p.m. And all of those things, depending on
8 p.m. is kind of crazy to me if you're hanging out at 6 p.m. or that you said you were hanging out at 6 p.m. That's definitely not the case in the Netherlands.
the situation is considered okay. In fact, there's almost a unspoken agreement that you do not show up maybe the first 15 minutes. There are two reasons for that. One, you can give your host a little bit of extra room time to prepare. And the second reason is that if it's a party of some kind, even if it's a small gathering, people don't like to be the first one there in the US. That is just how it works. So
I don't like to be the first one there either in the Netherlands. I definitely do that. I don't go to parties a lot because I'm not really into it. But when I did or do, I definitely wait a little bit so that I'm not the first person there.
they prefer to arrive 15 minutes or so later so that maybe they arrive with another person or there are already people there. But here in the Netherlands, 6 p.m. means 6 p.m. It does not mean 7 p.m. or 1900 hours, take your pick. It doesn't even mean 6:15 p.m.
Sometimes it does. I feel like in Brabant, where I'm from, we definitely do that. Sometimes, like, we have the 15-minute rule where you can show up 15 minutes later, and that's fine. So I'd say that's definitely different throughout the whole country as well.
It just means 6 p.m.
But let me know if you're Dutch, where you're from, and what your view on this is.
In preparing for this video, I thought a little bit about, should I explain why that is here in the Netherlands? But then I very quickly realized that the way we do it in America is completely weird. Because what if someone's not in on this unspoken agreement and they show up on time? I think it would be a little bit awkward. It would not be unacceptable because that you were technically invited at that time. But it's so funny that as a society, we've decided that we're gonna show up late for very many things. So in the US, we complicate things a little bit, but here in the Netherlands, keep it simple. Show up at the time you're invited. So those are my 9 suggestions for what not to do when you are here in the Netherlands. If you have anything to add or any additional comments about the things that I've mentioned, please let me know. I would love to hear from you. And if you haven't subscribed yet,
Yeah, I feel like she did a good job of selecting things that you shouldn't do in the Netherlands. And like I said, some things might not actually be as bad as when you do them, and some things are considered more rude or you just shouldn't do. So if you're from the Netherlands, let me know what your take on this is. And if you're not from the Netherlands, then let me know what shocked you the most about these things that you shouldn't do.